He probably wears that furry hat to cover up the bruises, Callum sneered to his friends. But what they didn't know was that the quiet royal guard they were mocking was a combat specialist with the household division. And when he finally stepped onto the mat, the entire gym went dead silent in just 13 seconds. Before we reveal what happened next, hit that like button and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from today. Now, let's get into it. The Forge Jiu-Jitsu Academy smelled of fresh sweat and old determination. You know that distinctive scent? Rubber mats warmed by body heat, the faint tang of disinfectant, and something else. Something like quiet ambition simmering beneath fluorescent lights. The afternoon sun cut sharp rectangles across the blue mats, where 20 bodies moved in practiced rhythm, their bare feet whispering against the surface, while instructors called out commands that echoed off the mirrored walls. Corporal Samuel Ayres stood near the entrance, waiting for his turn to sign the visitor waiver. He wasn't here to prove anything, just to stay sharp during his 3-month leave after completing a full cycle with the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment at Horse Guards Parade. Long days of ceremonial duty had honed his patience to something almost inhuman. Standing motionless for hours under the weight of tradition had built a stillness in him that most mistake for weakness. They always do. He wore a plain grey hoodie and black joggers. Nothing that screamed military, no patches, no dog tags visible, no regimental T-shirts. Just a man in his early 30s with a regulation haircut and posture so perfect it looked effortless. The kind of straight spine most people need to be reminded about, but for Ayres was just normal. "First time training, mate?" asked Johnny, the stocky brown belt who owned the place. His handshake was firm but friendly, eyes already assessing the newcomer with that practiced sweep instructors develop over years. "First time in a while," Ayres replied, non-committal. His voice was quiet but clear, the kind that doesn't need volume because it's used to being heard the first time. He meant it. He hadn't rolled in nearly 2 years. His last gym had been in Windsor, mostly used by active duty personnel cycling through field training. This civilian space felt different, warmer, less utilitarian, with motivational quotes on the wall instead of unit insignia. Class began with the usual shuffle of students finding their places on the mat. The regulars bunched together in familiar clusters. Weekend warriors in their 30s, a couple of competitive types with custom GIs, and the beginners huddled near the back like they were afraid the mat might bite. And then there was Callum. You could spot him from across the room, not because he was particularly imposing, but because he made sure you noticed him. Blue belt, tied just a little too perfectly. Rash guard a size too small to showcase the physique he clearly spent hours cultivating, and a voice that always seemed calibrated to reach the farthest corner of the room. "Check out the new guy," Callum stage whispered to his training partner while glancing at Ayres. "Looks like someone's dad decided to take up martial arts because his doctor told him to lose weight." His friends snickered, and a few others nearby glanced over at Ayres, who was quietly stretching his hamstrings in the corner, eyes fixed on the floor in front of him. If he heard the comment, he gave no sign. "I mean, come on," Callum added, rotating his shoulders dramatically. "You can tell he's never thrown a punch in his life. Bet he's here to learn how not to pass out standing still." More laughter. Johnny shot Callum a warning look that went completely ignored. Ayres didn't glance over, didn't flinch, didn't even pause his methodical stretching routine. Because while Callum was busy trying to win a room, Ayres was calibrating it, mapping it, learning. Just like he'd done in Basra, in Helmand, and later, every day, while standing stone still in the heart of London, while tourists shouted obscenities inches from his face, trying to make him react. These weren't the first jokes he'd weathered, not by a long shot. The warm-up drills began. Hip escapes, technical stand-ups, shoulder rolls across the mat. Ayres moved with quiet precision that caught Johnny's eye more than once. There was something in the economy of his movement that stood out, No wasted energy, no flourish, just clean execution that spoke of thousands of repetitions. For partner work, Ayres ended up with Nathan, a gangly white belt, maybe 20 years old, with the raw stiffness of someone still learning where to put his limbs. Ayres worked with him patiently, offering soft corrections when needed. "Relax your hips," he said gently, adjusting Nathan's position with a light touch. "You'll get more control that way." Nathan blinked in surprise. "Oh, right, cheers." He didn't know Ayres had taught ground grappling to military police in riot control scenarios. Didn't know he'd trained hand-to-hand under instructors who'd seen close-quarters combat in places most civilians couldn't find on a map. All Nathan saw was a quiet, polite man with calm hands and helpful advice. Callum, practicing wrist escapes with a lanky purple belt nearby, kept glancing over. His face twisted into a smirk that grew bolder with each passing minute. "You ever been in a real fight, Buckingham?" he called out suddenly, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Ayres didn't look up. He repositioned Nathan's knee slightly and said, "Try that now." "Oi, I'm talking to you," Callum pressed, his voice carrying that edge of someone used to being the centre of attention. "You do realise Jiu-Jitsu's not about just standing still, right?" A few students chuckled, some more awkwardly than others. Johnny, the instructor, gave Callum a sharp look. "All right, enough," he said. "We don't train for ego here." But ego was thick in the air. You could almost taste it mixing with the sweat and determination. Callum rolled his eyes dramatically, then leaned toward his partner. "Bet he's used to people just clapping while he walks past in a furry hat." The words hung in the air like cigarette smoke, unwelcome but persistent. Ayres heard it all. His ears were trained to pick up even whispered threats in crowded tourist areas, but he didn't acknowledge it. Because what was there to gain? The class moved on to positional drills, escapes and counters. Ayres worked smoothly. Quiet, patient. A couple of more experienced students started nodding with subtle respect. He didn't flail, he didn't force anything. His balance was uncanny, the kind you don't develop doing fitness classes twice a week. "You've done this before, haven't you?" one of them asked quietly during a water break. Ayres just offered a small shrug. "A bit." By the end of class, sweat darkened everyone's clothing, and the mats glistened under the lights. Ayres helped Nathan gather his gear, thanked Johnny with a quiet handshake, and slipped his hoodie back on without ceremony. He was halfway out the door when Callum's voice cut through the post-class chatter. "Don't forget to salute the mop on your way out," he called, laughing at his own joke like it deserved an audience. Johnny's jaw tightened visibly, but Ayres just gave a short nod and stepped outside into the cool evening air. Sometimes the best response is none at all. Because those who need to talk the most are often the ones who've proved the least. Saturday rolled around, and Ayres returned for the mid-morning class, hood up, duffel bag in hand, greeting no one unless greeted first. He warmed up slowly in the corner, flowing through hip escapes and shoulder rolls with that same clinical precision. Not flashy, just sharp, like a well-maintained knife that doesn't need to catch the light to do its job. Callum was already bouncing on the balls of his feet when Ayres walked in. His voice had that half-mocking cheerfulness that always preceded a challenge. "All right, Buckingham," he called out. "You ready to do something besides breathing exercises today?" Johnny gave a polite chuckle, though his eyes flicked toward Ayres with faint concern. "Easy," he warned. "It's sparring day, not street fighting." Ayres said nothing, just nodded toward the schedule board as if confirming what he already knew. After an hour of drilling transitions and grip breaks, Johnny clapped his hands twice, cutting through the controlled chaos. "All right. If you want to roll light, find a partner. Stay playful, keep your ego at the door." Callum was on his feet instantly. "Let's go, Palace," he said, clapping his hands at Ayres like calling a dog. The room went quiet for a moment. The gym had its own quiet hierarchy. Callum wasn't the best, but he was one of the loudest. And Ayres? Still just that quiet man in the corner, who did everything well but nothing spectacular. Ayres approached with unhurried steps and gave a simple nod. "If you like." They slapped hands and bumped fists. Then the mat fell quiet. Callum wasted no time. He lunged with a collar tie, forcing Ayres into a reaction. But instead of scrambling, Ayres lowered his base and posted a hand, neutralizing the forward pressure without overcommitting. His balance held, like he was bolted to the floor. "Not bad," Callum muttered, circling. "Let's see if Buckingham's got a guard pass in him." He shot in for a quick ankle pick, aggressive and unmeasured, the move of someone used to bullying through technique. Ayres sprawled low, hips back, redirecting the movement without force. It wasn't dramatic, but it was precise, like watching water flow around a rock. Callum reset, frustration creeping into his movements. He went again, this time for a snap down. Ayres redirected with a simple overhook and turned his hips just enough to deny the control. "You trying to meditate or win?" Callum barked, the first hint of genuine irritation cracking his cocky facade. "I'm not trying to do either," Ayres replied calmly. The words made Callum rush. He dove in, trying to muscle Ayres onto his back, but found himself stuck in half guard before he realized it. Ayres held position, not trapping, not advancing, just maintaining control with surgical efficiency. "You're boring," Callum snapped. "And you're impatient," Ayres said, the words not taunting, but simple observation. Johnny whistled lightly from the edge. "You okay in there, Callum?" "I'm fine," Callum growled, but he wasn't. His face had turned a shade darker, sweat beading on his brow, more from frustration than exertion. By the time the timer beeped, Callum was breathing heavier than expected, and Ayres hadn't even changed his breathing pattern. Ayres helped him to his feet and bowed his head slightly. "Thanks for the round." Callum didn't reply, just stalked off toward the water fountain. As Ayres walked off the mat, more than a few eyes followed him. Not with awe, yet, but with something approaching curiosity. They'd expected to see Buckingham Palace on a mat. Instead, they'd glimpsed something else entirely. Johnny watched from the sidelines, arms folded across his chest. There was something unsettling about how Ayres moved. Not because it was threatening, but because it was so completely in control. By the third week, Ayres had become a fixture at the gym. Always early, always methodical. Never missing warm-up. He still barely spoke unless spoken to. And when he did, it was with that quiet formality that some found unsettling, but others were beginning to respect. He never showed aggression, never overpowered anyone, but he had a way of shifting weight, adjusting angles, and diffusing momentum that made stronger opponents feel strangely ineffective, like trying to punch in a dream. "He doesn't roll to win," one brown belt remarked to Johnny after class. "He rolls like he's learning how you breathe." Callum didn't share the sentiment. If anything, Ayres' steady presence only made him more irritable, like sandpaper against his confidence. One evening after class, Callum loudly joked in the locker room, "Maybe they train stillness as a martial art now. Buckingham here's probably got a black belt in standing around." A few chuckled, but fewer than before. Some exchanged glances and kept changing, the laughter feeling forced. Johnny, hanging up fresh towels nearby, overheard and said quietly, "Careful, mate, I think he's more than he lets on." Callum rolled his eyes. "Please, he's just polite, doesn't mean he's lethal." But even Callum's voice lacked its usual bite, like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. That Thursday, the atmosphere changed. Professor Alexi Ramos had arrived. A visiting fourth-degree black belt from Sao Paulo, Ramos carried himself with the easy charisma of someone who'd been tapped to demonstrate technique across Europe. His seminars were packed, his style clean and unpretentious. When he walked in wearing a sun-faded black gi, the gym buzzed with anticipation. "Obrigado for having me," Ramos said, with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Let's roll light, but with intention." Callum lit up like a child at Christmas. He'd been watching Ramos's YouTube clips for years. When Ramos asked for volunteers to demonstrate a technique, Callum stepped forward before anyone else. "Let's do it," he said, unable to hide his eagerness. Ramos nodded warmly. "Okay, my friend, let's have a play." They slapped hands. Within seconds, Ramos had established grips that made Callum look like he'd forgotten everything he'd learned. The blue belt fought hard, but his pressure was met with liquid precision that seemed to anticipate every move. 42 seconds in, Callum tapped, caught in a triangle choke that came so smooth it looked like choreography. The gym clapped. Ramos bowed respectfully and helped Callum up. "Very strong," he said kindly. "But don't fight the ocean, my friend. You drown." Callum chuckled breathlessly, embarrassed but playing it off. "Guess I needed that." Ramos scanned the room, and his gaze settled on Ayres, who was quietly folding towels onto a rack in the corner. "That one," Ramos said to Johnny, nodding toward Ayres. "He trains before?" Johnny shrugged. "Army, maybe? Doesn't say much." Ramos watched a moment longer, his practiced eye catching what others missed. "He moves like he's wrestled for more than exercise." Callum caught the exchange, his face soured like milk left in the sun. "He just does drills, doesn't even spar hard." Ramos nodded slowly, a knowing smile touching his lips. "The quiet ones always watch." Saturday's open mat brought more energy than usual. Gym members brought friends. A few visiting practitioners from nearby clubs trickled in, some looking for a friendly role, others just to watch. Among them was Theo Grant. Theo was well known on the local circuit, a black belt with sharp technique and a sharper tongue. He wore his confidence like a second GI, tailored, fitted, loud. His reputation preceded him. 3-time regional champ, known more for flashy submissions than humility. Callum's eyes lit up when Theo walked in. They chatted near the water cooler, voices just loud enough for others to hear. "That one over there," Callum nodded toward Ayres, who was calmly sweeping the floor. "Royal Guard or something. All parade, no punch." Theo smirked, running a hand through his expertly dishevelled hair. "He roll." "Kind of, but soft, like he's posing for a painting." Ayres didn't hear the comment, or if he did, he gave no sign. He finished cleaning, placed the broom in the corner, and began stretching by the wall, each movement measured and deliberate. Johnny gathered everyone in the middle of the mat. "Visitors welcome today. Light sparring only. Be mindful of pace and control." Theo clapped his hands once. "Love it! Who's up first?" No answer at first. The room seemed to hold its breath. Callum broke the silence. "Let Buckingham go." A few heads turned. Eyes shifted from Callum to Ayres to Theo and back again. Theo's grin widened, wolf-like. "All right then. Let's go, guard boy." Ayres paused mid-stretch. He looked at Johnny for confirmation, his expression revealing nothing. Johnny gave a short nod. "Up to you, Sam." Ayres stood slowly, walking to the mat without urgency. He removed his hoodie and stepped barefoot into the centre, calm, composed, like it was any other drill on any other day. Theo sized him up theatrically, flexing his shoulders. "You ever fight someone who actually fights back?" Ayres didn't reply. He just bowed. The mat fell silent. Even the usual background chatter died away, leaving only the sound of the ceiling fans whirring overhead. Johnny raised his hand between them. "Go." The moment the word "go" dropped, Theo burst forward like a sprinter off the blocks. He went for a high collar grip, textbook aggression, looking to dominate early. But the second his fingers latched fabric, Ayres turned. A subtle pivot. Nothing flashy. Theo didn't expect the grip break, didn't expect the quick step outside, didn't expect the guard pull that turned into a tight cross-collar grip in transition. The entire gym blinked. Theo was already on his side. Ayres was behind him, legs wrapped, GI tight, elbow threading under chin. Theo thrashed once, twice. The bow and arrow choke was already set. Tap, a sharp slap of palm against the mat. 1, 2, urgent. Johnny dropped to his knees. Stop! Ayres released instantly, rolled off, sat up, calm, breathing. Theo coughed hard, rubbing his throat with one hand, eyes wide with disbelief. He stared at Ayres like he'd just been hit by a car he never saw coming. The gym was dead silent, not even breathing. Just the hum of the ventilation system and the distant sound of traffic outside. Even Callum's mouth hung open, his usual commentary nowhere to be found. Someone near the back whispered, "That was under 15 seconds." Johnny looked at the wall clock. 13. Ayres stood and extended a hand to Theo. The black belt hesitated, then took it. Ayres helped him up with the same grace he'd entered with. "Thank you," he said quietly. Then he stepped off the mat. No celebration, no fist pumping, no acknowledgement of the stunned faces surrounding him. Just the same quiet discipline he'd displayed since day one. Johnny looked at Ramos, who had quietly watched from the bench, arms folded across his chest. The professor gave a slow nod of approval, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Theo stood still, one hand on his knee for support, eyes locked on Ayres' back. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The room had already been answered. After the final bow of class, the mats were rolled and bodies drifted toward the changing rooms in murmurs, quieter than usual, respectful, hushed, like mourners at a funeral where the deceased was someone's overconfidence. Ayres was already slipping his hoodie back on when Johnny approached. "You ever done competition?" the instructor asked, tone neutral but curious. Ayres gave a polite half-smile. "Once or twice." Johnny nodded, processing that understatement. "What's your background, if you don't mind?" Before Ayres could answer, Ramos stepped in from the side. "He trains with the Army Combat Sports Program," the professor said with quiet certainty. Ayres hesitated, then nodded. "Household division," he added. "We train ground control, public threat containment, close combat retention." Johnny blinked. "So, not just ceremonial." Ayres met his gaze. "Ceremonial is what we do, not what we are." From behind, Callum stammered, "Wait, you're actually military?" Theo, still rubbing his neck, answered for him. "That wasn't ceremonial." Ayres' eyes flicked to him, calm and level. "Neither is our job." A long pause settled over the room. The atmosphere had changed entirely. It wasn't embarrassment, just the awkward adjustment of perception being reset, like seeing a familiar landscape suddenly illuminated by lightning. A younger student, the same one who had laughed at Callum's jokes, stepped forward quietly. "I didn't know you guys trained like that," he said, genuine respect replacing the previous mockery. Ayres shrugged. "We don't advertise it. That's not the job." Johnny tilted his head. "So why not say something earlier?" Ayres looked around the room, his gaze touching each face briefly. "Because respect isn't something you ask for." He let the sentence land, let the silence linger like the echo of a church bell. "It's something you earn, preferably without speaking." Even Callum didn't speak this time. He just looked down, then muttered a subdued, "Fair enough." Johnny folded his arms. "You ever thought about teaching?" Ayres shook his head. "No, just here to stay sharp." "Well," Ramos said, stepping forward and offering his hand, "you've done more than that." Ayres took it. "Thank you, Professor." The handshake was quiet, firm, unhurried, like a period at the end of a sentence that needed no exclamation point, no applause, no photos, just a room of people who now saw something they hadn't before. "And Ayres. He grabbed his gym bag, nodded respectfully to the group, and walked toward the door. His steps were quiet, balanced, not rushed. He walked the same way he stood guard, like someone with nothing to prove and everything under control. Would you have underestimated someone like Ayres at the gym? Should Royal Guards be more open about their training, or is quiet discipline better? And what would you have done if you were Callum? Drop your answers in the comments. We read every single one of them. If this story surprised or inspired you, give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more Royal Guard stories like this one. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a daily upload. Share this video with someone who still thinks Royal Guards just march around in funny hats. Let them see what real discipline looks like, on and off the mat. You should see some of our other Royal Guard stories popping up on your screen right now. Check those out next, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, with another true feeling story of quiet strength and real discipline.